Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Pam Conway. I am the Chief Learning Officer for Intellezy. I'm very happy to have all of you here today for our presentation. On behalf of Intellezy and TechNet UC, thank you so much. I'd like to talk just briefly about our two companies so you sort of know who we are and how we work together. Our two companies partnered together to bring our individual spheres of expertise to help empower your organizations to embrace and utilize technologies like Microsoft 365, Teams, Azure, Dynamics 365. And our approach really focuses on understanding your business needs, helping to position you to be ready for your migration so that you can have as few disruptions as possible, and really providing full support all along the journey. So that's a little bit about who our companies are, but let's really dive into what you're here for to learn a little bit more about all of the great stuff that Michael has to share with us. So I'm happy to introduce Michael Chase, who's going to lead us through our presentation. Thanks, Michael.
Of course. So I'll just do a quick introduction of myself as well. My name is Michael Chase. I am a cloud solutions engineer for TechNet UC, and I'm working with Intellezy to get you guys where you need to for power automation and building workflows within your environment to streamline different processes that may be more manual right now, and kind of putting the control into your hands. So to kind of get started, I'm just going to briefly tell you a little bit about Power Automate. If you've dealt with any of the Microsoft Power Apps before, this may sound kind of new to you because they recently rebranded it. It was called Flow before. So if you've ever heard of Microsoft Flow, Power Automate is the same thing. And it is Microsoft's low code platform that you can basically streamline manual processes inside of your organization. Now, if there's processes that are paper-based or were paper-based pre-COVID, where you could walk to somebody in the office, get a signature, get an approval, and archive it in a file folder somewhere. Obviously, that doesn't work as well in a COVID world where everyone's working remotely or we're not coming into contact with each other. So kind of digitizing those processes, capturing approvals with timestamps, kind of having a chain of record, those sorts of things, to ingesting hard copy documents and, OCRing them, which is just, an AI engine kind of reading them for you and archiving them. I mean, it's kind of, the sky's the limit with Power Automate. You can start very simple or you can make them as complex as possible, but the ultimate goal is to give you guys the power to build custom solutions, to extend maybe native functionality within certain apps that you guys use for production purposes or business purposes, so that you can kind of make the apps work for you rather than being confined to what comes pre-programmed out of the box with those applications. So just to kind of give you a quick overview of the agenda. So today I'm going to quickly go through a couple of slides. The normal spiel of like why this is important, what you can do with the investment, the return on that investment that you will see, and I'll go through that pretty quickly, and then we're going to just jump into kind of a live demo. I'll show you guys how to get into Power Automate, how you can navigate the system and start building some of your first flows. And we'll start pretty simple, and then I'll show you how complex it can get. And I still won't even go as complex as it can get, but we'll get pretty in there so you can see kind of what's available to you. So moving right along, you'll see organizations across all industries right now are needing to adapt and oops, sorry, the picture went away. Okay, are struggling to adapt very quickly. So going back to that whole statement that I made before about not being confined with what comes out of the box. I think, if any of you have been in technology or technical roles for any sort of length of time, several years ago, even 5 years ago, if a program didn't do something, you were confined to it and you had to put in enhancement requests with the vendors, hoping that they built it into one of their rev cycles. But we're not confined to that anymore with these kind of low code tools, Power Automate being kind of the biggest player and the most easily integrated because it's a Microsoft product. So you can look at some of the statistics here. You know, there people are struggling with keeping up with app development, kind of these custom solutions, having programs do everything that they need to do, you know, sort of that thing. And that's where Power Automate comes in to fill those gaps. And just if you needed any more evidence that this market is growing, you know, I deal in this space. I deal with cloud, but when COVID first started, it was very much in getting everybody to the cloud. Now that a lot of my clients have now moved to the cloud, I get asked about these low code automation tools more than anything, to the point of I have more work than I can keep up with because of the things that Power Automate can do and the value that these companies are seeing. So it's a very much an emerging market, but it is huge, and I can't state that enough. The power that these tools have cannot be overstated. I mean, they're very powerful, and it will transform the way that your business it runs. And instead of needing months to develop custom solutions or integrations, you're looking at weeks, if not days, a lot of times. So from there, you know, just still kind of touching on some of these customer challenges. You know, a lot of it has to do with the agility of these processes. You know, as things have increasingly gone to the cloud and people are needing these custom integrations, there's a lack of skill in the market. I mean, not all of us are developers. I most certainly am not a developer. Don't want to be. I'm sure most of you don't want to be as well. But we sometimes have to fill that role, and we need tools to do it. And with something like Power Automate, those tools become available to the masses without needing to have any development skills or coding skills, just with some very base level knowledge. And still just the same stuff here with the kind of the spiel. It's kind of reiterating the same thing. You're able to scale very quickly. I've taken processes for like new position requisitions that have to get approved by finance and HR and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, and turned them into flows, and it's taken me, you know, a week, which is something that, you know, they were doing manually before, and I can completely transform their process in no time at all, which is really great. And you want to knock some people's socks up in your organizations or clients that you may be working with. It's going into a meeting and saying, yes, I can build that for you, and it's going to take me 2 weeks, because most of them are going to be like, wait, what? I was expecting months, but because of tools like Power Automate, you don't need that kind of lead time. And I'm just going to skip through these. This is just more of the same about modernizing legacy things, and kind of just how we can transform these manual processes and things into actionable workflows. So now we're going to get into the demo. So I'm going to escape out of the PowerPoint presentation, and we're just going to walk through it from start to finish. How do we get to Power Automate? How do we kind of navigate inside of it with templates and kind of pre-built things that we can use to build off of, and how then we can take those kind of fundamental steps and build our own processes and workflows from scratch. So let me get out of this and onto my screen here, and I'm just going to start here. So I already logged in, so let me open up a different tab. I kind of got ahead of myself here. But Power Automate is a web application. There is no desktop application. Well, actually, I take that back. There is now, it's in preview, a desktop application that uses their AI engine that records like what you're doing on the screen. So, you know, it's mainly meant for legacy applications that don't have APIs that you can integrate with and make calls to. It just basically takes whatever you're doing on your screen with clicks and writes code behind it to automate processes with applications that don't have modern protocols, basically, that you can't integrate with. So to get there, it's funny because they've rebranded it to Power Automate, but the link to get there is still flow.microsoft.com. Since it was called Microsoft Flow before, you just navigate there. It's going to ask you to sign in. You don't need an extra license. Everyone within Microsoft 365 gets kind of a trial license, and not even a trial. It's a Power Automate license. And as long as you don't go above certain limitations within it, you don't need a license to do more. If you're going to be using Power Automate to drive a lot of calls and a lot of processes, you will need a license because they limit the number of transactions you can do on that kind of base license that comes with any sort of organizational license or business license inside of Microsoft 365. So once we are here, you can see we are kind of taken to the main page, and all of our navigation settings are over here on the right. So you have a section here for flows that you have built, and I'll go in here in just a second. But what we are kind of wanting to go into first, especially if this is your first time, is into templates. So templates here is basically, there's a community. Some of these are built by Microsoft. A lot of them are built by community members, because there are people like me who build flows for lots of people, and it's like, hey, if I can help you guys out, take this and use it for what it's worth, sort of thing. Yeah, to just help each other out. And it's the same thing that here, they can upload their flows and they become part of the community, and you can kind of feed off of each other, which is nice, so that, you know, you may have a similar need as somebody else, and there may already be a templated flow in here that you can kind of borrow from. So as you're coming in here for the first time and familiarizing yourself with it, you can see, you can search for templates here in the search box, and then they have all of the different kind of categories here, and you can scroll through, see if there are any that maybe meet your needs. One that I usually tell people to start with is files, like copying files around or syncing files between two different locations. And there is a section for that. It's just not up here along the top. You just click on the triple dots, and then we're going to go down here to sync. So this is going to be where you find all of kind of the file saving or file sharing, file archiving kind of templates that we can work with. So an easy one to start with is taking attachments inside of your email and putting them in your OneDrive, rather than having to worry about your profile and Outlook getting corrupted and losing information. You can come in here, find this template, and set it up for whoever you want, even if it's for yourself personally. That's the other nice thing about this, is some of these flows can actually be set up by employees themselves if they have the desire to do that, and they have all the skills necessary, especially if they're just using templates to kind of do what they need to do. You can extend it that way. So I'm just going to open this up. If we open the template, it's going to show you the different services that are involved here. This one, again, is pretty simple. We're looking at just taking attachments in Outlook and putting them in OneDrive. So it's always going to put the services that are going to be used up here along the top, and then down at the bottom, it's going to it will either pull in your credentials and make a connection to those services, or you have to click the plus sign to sign in and make those connections. So if this is for me personally, it's very easy. I can obviously just come in here, put in my account information, and it will make that connection. If you are someone working in the IT department, I don't know why this is being strange like this, because I was logged in before. This also may not be a business one with this template. So let me go in here and find another one. But it'll make you make those connections. The thing that I was going to say is, if you are in the IT department and you're making these for different business units within the organization, you most likely will want to make a service account, obviously, to drive all of those, so that all of those workflows are in a central repository, and it's not using any user credentials to kind of get in here and drive that. But that's where the templates kind of come from. Rather than trying to go through here and find, I think this is probably something more that you guys can kind of play with on your own. This is a really good place to start, to familiarize yourself with it. Once you get in there, you'll see kind of how it works. But to get us where we need to go, I'm going to show you guys one of the simple ones that I have made for one of my clients here in the Boston area. And it's a common problem with a lot of my clients. So, they're a biotech company. They have different drugs that are in different phases of development, and there are different project teams for each of those drugs or studies. So they all have their individual team sites, their individual SharePoint sites, where they are tracking all of their progress. They may have a dashboard that they've built in Power BI, whatever the case may be. But because it's in that project team or SharePoint, I need to see status updates, or just like the dashboard view to see where everything is at in the timeline and things like that. But we don't want to necessarily give them access into everything on that team or that SharePoint site. We just need to take a copy of whatever we need them to see and move it somewhere where they have access to see it. And especially when you're dealing with 10, 15 different studies, it becomes a bigger deal. So that's where, you know, these came through. It was a request from one of the users running one of the studies saying, you know, hey, I'm tired of having to constantly remember to move manually. Plus, now I don't know which one's the newest one. File versions get out of sync, whatever the case may be. So it's easy enough to solve. We can just build a flow that programmatically moves it when it is updated from the source to the destination, which is exactly what we're doing with this. So if I go in here, I'll show you the flow. If I click edit, you'll see it's not very complicated. It's just 3 simple steps, but it does everything that I need it to do. It's gonna, I even have conditional logic programmed in here to make sure that it's the right thing, that it's the right file, everything, so that we're not grabbing too much information. We're just getting what we need. So kind of the foundational aspect of Power Automation and flows when you're building them is this idea of triggers versus actions. So every flow must start with a trigger. You may hear people, including myself, who will call them listeners. They're the same thing. So all it is something that is listening for a certain criteria to be met. So in this one, we're dealing with SharePoint files. That's where the dashboards for the individual studies were saved. So I need to put a listener on the source SharePoint site, which is what this first one is doing. I put in the site address, what the library name is, and the actual folder that I need to look in for the actual file that I am looking to copy. So that's where this trigger and or listener is coming from, is I'm just saying, hey, here's the site address and the library name and the file folder that I need you to watch. When there is an update made to this specific file, which is what is referenced here in this ID value, when there is a change made at all, if someone has even just added a period, I need to know about it, which is what this listener is doing. It's going to get me those file properties of everything that has changed. And then it's going to make sure that it is the document, because there obviously is more than one document in that file folder. It's going to make sure that it's the document that I'm looking for. So that's where this conditional logic comes in. And I can make sure that the name is this. This is the particular file we are looking to copy to the destination. So I'm just doing a conditional check, making sure I have the right file, that I'm not pulling anything that I don't need. And then if that condition is found to be true, it goes down the yes branch, and it's going to then copy that file. You put in the folder path and the file name, and then here's where I need it saved, the destination folder, and then you get to decide if it's overwritten or if we're making copies and all of that. There are some configurable options in here that you can do. And if this condition ends up being false, there's nothing in the no column, so the flow just stops. If it's not the right file, if there weren't any changes actually made, no harm, no foul, the flow just stops as successful. There was no changes to be made. And that's really it. I mean, starting with a simple flow, it can be something just like this. And the one thing that I wanted to mention as well is you see some of these placeholders like ID or name. This is all dynamic content. So, you know, if you've ever done any programming or scripting or anything like that, it all has to do with variables or placeholders, functions, parameters. That's exactly what this is. So instead of having to hard code everything, because obviously this is going to be a live process, I need it to just use whatever variable I'm needing. So like with this one, the actual ID of the file, and this one is the name. And when you click in these, you'll see it gives you all access to all of these things. So you have the option for dynamic content. It's going to show you all of the file properties that we have access to that I can then reference, whether I'm building conditional logic or if I need to reference that for something else, like even building the folder path and the file name. I can do the same when I'm saving it. If I want it saved as a different file name, I can reference some of these values if needed to build that file name so that it appears as I want it to be. So that's one very powerful piece of the puzzle for Power Automate, is this dynamic ability. I know that's not a word, but the fact that it is so dynamic, and you can reference the information you need without having to know any scripting whatsoever. Because if you've ever done scripting, that's one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest headaches, is all of the variables and references to do that. And the other thing that you'll see here, so we have the dynamic content, yes, and you'll see there's so many fields based on the different things that we've pulled and done and have brought into this flow that we can reference. The sky's the limit with that. But even beyond this, we have an option for expressions here. So if you guys have ever dealt with, I don't know, regex, or a better example is even formulas inside of Excel, that's kind of the same thing. I mean, it's the same symbol. You can see the FX, and something that is upcoming is they're getting ready to actually do a release of what they call Power FX, which is another, it's kind of similar to Power Automate, but more coding intensive. But rather than having to know all the code, it's going to be like functions within Excel that have code behind certain functions, so where you can build better integrations. But it's the same thing with this. And expression, especially in the beginning, you most likely will not use. It's more for more complicated workflows when you're needing to take response data for, like, if I've made an API call, it sends me a response in XML, JSON, whatever format it's programmed to respond with, and then taking that and parsing it out. The way you parse it out is through functions. So it's like, if I may get a whole response with all kinds of details and I just need the person's name, so then I parse the JSON to just grab the name with expressions through Power Automate. Like I said, that's more advanced than what we're trying to get into today. I just wanted to mention it so that you guys know, like, these tools are here. Don't be scared of them. Play with them if you want, and just to show you the capabilities of it, because out of the box it looks pretty simplistic, but the tools are here to make it extremely full-featured and I mean, it can be as complicated as you want, essentially. So that's our first simple flow. I kind of want to take it to the next level from here. This one was a good one just because it was a very simple, we're listening for a file and we're copying it. It has one condition, basically to make sure we have the right file. But what about kind of a bigger process, right? Like, this is an easy one to fix. The user themselves could have done this. But where I have come in to a lot of clients is, I deal with a lot of startups. So, they're dealing with less than 100 people. They might be cash strapped and they're like, we're growing, we're getting ready to go market, we're phase 3 clinical trial, whatever the case may be. This is actually a real example that happens with me. They're like, we don't have the money to spend on an HRIS system, but we need an onboarding and offboarding solution. And I said, done, I can build that for you very easily with Power Automate, and you won't have to spend a dime because you already have the license in your tenant. It's already assigned to you, and we don't actually need an HRIS system. We have SharePoint and we have Power Automate. And I built them an entire new hire process without spending a single cent except of my time, and I was able to build it within 1 to 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks by the time we finished testing it and kind of working out some of the kinks. But it totally transformed their process. And going from emails going back and forth to automated user creation and user offboarding has made it to where they're not doing manual tests. There's no room for error, and we can focus our efforts and attention on bigger problems than creating new user accounts. No one wants to do that all day. It's repetitive and it's simplistic. I mean, it's not something that someone should spend their time doing when we can automate it. So I just want to get us over there. So I'm going to go back to my flows. You won't see it listed here because it's not there, but you can see some different options along the top. So cloud flows, desktop flows are what I was telling you before. This is the app that you can download on your machine. It's mainly meant for legacy applications, like I was telling you, that don't have APIs that you can integrate with, so that it will literally watch your screen as you do what you need to do, as you click around, as you enter information, and it's writing code behind you all the time, so that it can automate that process with the code that it's writing. So this one is very powerful. It's relatively new. It's mainly until just very recently, it was in preview. Oh, it still is preview. I see that now. But I thought they had released it to the general public, but it's still very much beta. So I I wouldn't necessarily throw all in. It's something to definitely play with and see what it can offer. But I would stick more to the traditional flows for now. And this one is under shared with me because I actually built it in another tenant and then shared it with myself in this one. So we can look at this here. I'm going to pull open this new hire account request. So there, for this new hire process, it involves the account creation and then access, right? That's always the big issue when you're dealing with new hire onboarding or contingent worker onboarding is, yes, they need an account, but also what do they need access to? And who's going to know what they need access to? Usually the manager. So kind of integrating the two together. So I'm going to open up the first one because it's the account creation that gets triggered first. And I won't go into all of this step by step. I just kind of want to show you what is available to be done and kind of how complex this can get. And even from this one, from what you'll see, it can get much more complex than this. But this is a good example of how you can transform, a very common process inside of your organization and automate it. And this isn't to say that, if you do have an HRIS system, this isn't available to you. It absolutely is. Power Automate integrates with pretty much any third-party application that you can think of. So I've done integrations with Workday, ADP, any sort of HRIS system, Dynamics, all of it. You can create connections with those to where, if they make a change in the HRIS system, then it kicks this flow. This one is triggered in SharePoint just because they didn't have an HRIS system, but don't let that confuse you or count you out, because you can absolutely integrate with all of those third-party apps that you're used to. But without spending too long on that, we can take a look at this flow. And actually, I'm going to take you to one other place first, because what drives this is a Power Apps form. So talent acquisition inside of this particular client of mine has a link to this form. Obviously, this is a list with all of the data previously. When they click on the link that they have on their own team site or wherever they keep it, it doesn't take them where they can see all this. It's just taking them to the new form. And they come in here and just put in the information that they need. So they have a new hire. It's going to be Michael Test. Actually, we'll do test 2. Job title. This is the one I always use when I'm making test accounts, Master of the Universe. And then certain things that we make conditions out of in the process that you'll see is, their office location, whether they're an employee or a contractor. I'm going to say employee. They get to choose their supervisor, which is tied into the directory. So I'm going to make myself my own supervisor. So you can see it pulls in whoever's in the directory. You can choose the right one. They can choose when they're starting, when their start date is. Say they're going to start on Monday next week. Their home address, I make them put in so that we haven't done it yet. This is version 2 of this process. Is we're actually going to integrate with the FedEx account and call APIs to where it generates the shipping labels, so we can send them their new hire equipment, so like their laptop, their docking stations, and their monitors and things like that, since obviously no one's coming into the office right now because of COVID. So we'll just put test 1, 2, 3 in Cambridge. And this is where that's coming in. And even right now, even though it's not integrated with FedEx, an email gets sent to the IT department or the IT desk side resources so that they can manually generate those labels and send the information out. And I also make them put in this new user's personal email. And that's just because they're going to need credentials. I can send credentials to their company email all day, but if they don't have the initial credentials to log in, then I will be able to get to them. So we have an entire new hire packet, which is just a couple sheets long, that has their information, all of the IT policies, all of setup instructions when they get their computer, everything. So instead of having all of this stuff sitting at someone's desk and like the little new hire packet on their desk, we've digitized the entire thing. So TA never has to print anything off. They're coming in here, they're clicking save, which then kicks off the flow. So if I come back inside of the flow, we'll actually see the run in here going. But it's no more manual process. Everything is done through email. Everything is done through this flow. The account is automatically created. All the new hire information gets sent out, all programmatically without anyone ever having to touch a single thing. And so I'm not seeing the run come through. Sometimes it can take a few seconds, minute before you'll see it. But you can see like if I want to watch something, if I'm testing it real time, I just come into the flow and you can see your run history here. You can just refresh it and now I see it's running. If I want to watch it, I can click on this and I can actually watch it as it runs through the flow. If I both load here. So then I can see every step of the way what it is doing, which is actually really nice when you are testing and troubleshooting, because I can see exactly where it broke down and pinpoint my efforts on that. So I can see it's running here. Where's my mouse? There it is. And so like all these green check marks means that all of these have passed. It's down here, it's done this, and now it's on the last kind of conditional logic here. And it was true, I can see that, and now it's running through all of this. And I'll show you what this is all doing here in a second. I just kind of want you guys to see this whole process, because as you guys start getting in here and making your own flows, this is invaluable. It saved me many times trying to figure out where something went wrong, so I can go to that specific action and find it and resolve the issue. So this one's kind of taking a bit long, so I'm actually going to back out of here just so I can show you the whole process and explain some of the things in here that you guys will most likely run into as you start building your own flows in production or start playing around with it. So again, we start with our trigger. It's the same thing when an item is created. So I don't want this to run every time someone comes in and modifies things, because inside that list for the new hires, I will often go in there and modify things or add notes for the desk side people so that they know certain conditions that, special conditions or asks that might be for that new hire. And I don't want every modification to rerun this because then we're going to have problems. So only when the item is created on this site address in this list name, I want my flow to start. So that's what this is telling it to do. This is the trigger, the listener that is set up. Below this, you're going to see a lot of purple. Anytime you see purple like this, we're dealing with either a variable or we are creating strings for ourselves that we need to reference later. So a good example of this is in that new hire process, it was first name and last name, Michael Chase. But that's not my email, at least according to the naming convention for this client. They don't do first dot last. They want first initial, last name, and then a number if it already exists at sparrowtherapeutics.com. So I have to build that string because I don't make TA put that in. I have to build that string so that I can then reference it and set that as their email address, their user principal name, whatever the case may be. So that's where these variables come in. Is any information that you need to store and reference later or that you need to build. So that's why I have variables here for first name and last name, because I have to actually use those variables to then down here pull out the first letter and then put the first letter with the last name and then add the Sparrow Therapeutics. That's all what these are doing. So it looks like a lot when you're having to kind of create these strings, and you can see some of the expressions are in here to help me build those strings as I need them, so that I can reference them later. So again, it's going to take that first letter, last name, and then I just add sparrowtherapeutics.com on there. But that's all that these are for. You'll also see variables used a lot for IDs. So if it's like you're assigning somebody to a group, well, that's a static group ID. And then if the way Flow works and PowerShell works, it only works off of an ID, not a display name, because display names can be duplicated. So I store a lot of my group IDs, which I get out of Azure just right here. So if that value ever changes, I have to change it in one place. I don't have to go through my entire flow and try to find every place where I have input that. So I cannot recommend variables enough. Again, if you've ever done scripting or coding, it's the same kind of concept where if at the beginning of all of my scripts, I have variables listed for a mile long, so I can update them in one place and it updates the entire script. So that's the same thing that you're doing with Flow, is you don't want to have to dig through this again. I promise you, you want one place where you can update it in one place only. So that's where these variables are coming in. So down below this, we can see kind of what else is going on. So I have an action in here to copy some of the information to the access request list. So again, referencing back, I had the account creation and then the access creation. So I don't want the manager, I send a link to the access request form to the manager so that they can go in and choose requests. I don't want them to have to refill in first name, last name, email address, and all of that. So I take those fields and I copy them to a different list that I then link to for the managers because obviously that form is different too. They're choosing equipment, they're choosing access levels, license levels, all of that stuff. So I'm just pulling in the user's information so they're not having to re-enter it. And when they get the link, they'll know who it's for. So that's what this one is doing here. That one isn't always necessary. It was just for this particular task. And then from here, again, these are some new actions that you can see. So these are Azure Automation actions. So again, going back to the whole scripting, I'm a big scripter. So if you hear me referring to scripting a lot, it's because that's what I do. I love it. I thrive on it. So if there are things that cannot be done inside of Power Automate, you can always do it in PowerShell because PowerShell's been around a lot longer. And the way you do that is by referencing Azure Automation jobs. So even now, you're not confined to Flow. If Flow or Power Automate can't do exactly what you need to do, I can make it do it through PowerShell. I just call a PowerShell script right from the flow, which is what this is doing. And this is generating a random secure password because you have to have a password to create the user account. It's grabbing that password and I'm storing it then in a variable only because through my troubleshooting, it added extra characters. It was just white space on the ends that I had to then remove because it wouldn't set it with the white space. And then it uses those variables to actually create the user. And again, you can see I'm referencing the variables and the dynamic content that I already have access to, and it's making this user inside of my tenant now. And then it's checking. So this create user status code. I want to make sure it was successful. If it errored, I need to know it errored. If it's successful, I need it to move on. So that's what this is doing is I'm grabbing the status code and then I have a condition here to say, if it is equal to 201, which is the status that it was accepted and everything's fine, then we're ready to send the email to the supervisor with the link to do the access request. We're going to set their manager. We assign that manager to them so that their profile is complete. If they are an employee, again, and here's another condition, then we give them a license right away because employees at this particular company, they need to set up meetings with them before they ever start. Consultants are not the same, they get different licenses. So I just check to see if they're an employee. It automatically grants them an E5 so that they can do those things. So this is what this is doing. It's adding them to the group to assign them an E5. It's setting their employee ID number. And then once all of that is done, this is the template, like the new hire packet that I was talking about. It's just a template that I have saved in OneDrive with fields that are tagged there that I then map inside of here. This populate new hire. I have the tags for those fields and I put that information in there. So it's purely dynamic. So it will populate the template, save it with the new hire's name, which is exactly what this is doing. So we have a copy of it in case it gets lost in transmission. And then it grabs that attachment and puts it in an email with a little blurb to the new hire. So now they have their credentials, they have a little welcome message from the chief of technology. And then inside the attachment, which is actually underneath this show advanced option, it's pulling that OneDrive document template with their username and password. So that they have all of this information in there. And that's it. I mean, from there, I know we're getting a little close on time, so I'm gonna go a little bit faster through the rest of this, but I mean, that's the process from start to finish. I won't go through the access request other than just showing you quickly the flow because it's just another link to another form that the manager fills out. It's conditional logic even inside the form. So based on employee or a contractor, different fields are available because obviously with the contractor, they don't want to provide all of an entire office set up with them since they are a contractor. So they have different fields and different options to choose from essentially. And then once the form is submitted, same thing. It comes in here, the flow is triggered. You're going to see a lot of variables for group IDs because that's how we assign access to a lot of apps that they choose is we do it through role-based access control, which is all controlled through groups inside of our AD. And so you'll see all of this, all of these group IDs that I then map based on what they've chosen. So this, people always tend to get a little nervous when I show them this because oh, I changed it, never mind. But it's because there is a lot here, and these are all conditions. It's so like, okay, if they chose Coupa, then I need to add them to Coupa. If not, then it doesn't do anything, and it's going to run through all these and just assign them the access to the applications that their manager chose. And then at the very end, it sends a nice welcome email with some more new hire information based on whether they have a Windows virtual desktop or a laptop. I do another condition based on that to send the proper form based on what their setup's going to be to their email. So that, again, all of this is automated. No one's falling through the cracks. Once TA does their job, everything just happens from there. And you don't have to think about it. And if something goes wrong in the process, I have it configured in here to send us an email so that we can investigate it and set them up manually or whatever the case may be. So that's the kind of quick and dirty of Power Automate, showing you for something very simple to something a bit more complex. And like I said, they get more complex than here. Hopefully you never run into a situation that I ran into last week where I was transforming an entire approval process for new positions that needed to get approved through finance and HR. But I had to program a lot of logic, and apparently not well-known limitation of Power Automate is you can only nest 8 conditions inside of each other. So hopefully you never get to that point. But if you do, I do have a way around it. You can always call me. So let me get back to the PowerPoint presentation. And sorry, I have so many monitors here. There we go, except I'm on the wrong. Sorry about this, you guys. There we go. Okay. And perfect. All right, so now kind of bringing it back full circle to TechNet UC and kind of what we do. So obviously I'm a cloud engineer. I could teach you guys how to do this yourselves all day long. Intellezy is probably more adept at doing that since they are kind of the training piece of this, but I am the technical arm of this, or TechNet UC is the technical arm of this. So if you decide, Power Automate is something that could really bring some value to your organization and the workflows, Intellezy will handle the training aspect of it, and then you'll have the technical expertise of me and a lot of my fellow colleagues who live and breathe automation to kind of come in, look at your business processes, see where we can maybe implement Power Automate workflows to streamline them, help you troubleshoot any issues that may come up. I've seen them all at this point because I've done so many. So I would be hard pressed for you guys to bring something to me that I haven't seen. So just having that technical expertise behind you and the training aspect for continued growth and development in this area, I can't. It's a great partnership and a great value to you guys. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Pamela to take us out.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so just following up on what Michael said, and first of all, Michael, thank you for walking us through that. That was fantastic. The Intellezy side of this is really what we like to say is the people side of it. So our engagement comes in helping make sure that you can do all of the great things that Michael just showed you how to do. So it's really a two-pronged approach from that angle. One is a change management piece that really helps make sure that users understand what's coming with the change and with the implementation of a tool like this. So really that revolves around having a needs assessment, a consulting call, and then just a communication plan that we actually have templates set up for to help streamline that process. And then if we look at the training, really the training revolves around obviously making sure that people understand how to use the tool and have an ample time to practice in a safe and controlled environment before we unleash you on creating flows within your office. And then just continuing to provide ongoing support where we can and pulling in TechNet UC and geniuses like Michael to help make sure that we can get you through all of the thorny problems you might find. So really working with TechNet UC has been fantastic, and it's just a great partnership in terms of making sure that we have our clients covered from start all the way through to finish, so you can get up and running with tools that are so powerful, like Power Automate. So on that note, Michael, I think we can, we've got a few minutes if we want to open it up for questions.
Yes, absolutely. Let me look. So there is a live event Q&A. Unfortunately, attendees don't have the option to speak. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in that Q&A, and Pamela and I have access to those questions and are more than happy to answer them for you guys. I'll give a couple minutes for that. I apologize, because it'd be a bit easier if you guys could speak, but with these live events, it just doesn't allow for it.
Well, while we're waiting for people to form questions, Michael, I'm going to thank you. The example that you gave at the end, especially of the onboarding process, was fantastic and something that I think I would like to try to stand up within our organization.
Yeah, it's very powerful. It's insanely powerful, the things that it can do. And if we had more time, I would have shown you the one that I was talking about with the nested conditions, because that was a beast to create. But I mean, it has totally digitized a manual process that involved 4 different departments across the organization: printing and signing and scanning, and it's nice. It just changes everything.
So again, while we're waiting to see if anybody has questions, I actually have one that I would like to pick your brain about, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course, please.
So I would be curious to know if you have any suggested sort of prerequisites or skill sets that might help people as they approach a tool like this. I mean, obviously, you don't need to have necessarily a background in programming to use a tool like this, but what kind of skills might be helpful?
So I mean, some base technical knowledge would be nice, and I only say that depending on how complex you're wanting to get. Some of those flows, like I showed you in the templates, users could absolutely do. It's just setting up the connection more than anything and giving them access to your email and your OneDrive. But if you're doing more like process flow automation, just some base level knowledge and understanding kind of that whole trigger action and routing component. So it still isn't like super technical, but that is a big one, in understanding the flow of data through and understanding that piece. But other than that, that's the biggest one. Is I've tried to train people on the system before, and usually that's the big one, is when people have a harder time thinking very logically through something, because it's very easy to think high level, right? And say, yep, we need to go from A to B. But when you start you have to get very down into the weeds on a process flow like this, because I need to know every single decision point along the way, and you have to be able to think down that far. So that's the big one. If you can train your brain to dig down that far and think of every decision point and every little detail, because you're going to have to build this flow and make sure that there aren't any gaps in it.
Fantastic. And we do have some questions coming in now.
Okay, so from Eric, which connector component did you use to generate a random password with PowerShell? So actually, let me get out of the PowerPoint presentation again, and I can show you this. So this one, it is actually one, it's specifically for Azure Automation. So if I go into this new hire account one, I'll show you. It does require a little bit of setup inside the Azure piece. So I can come in here, and if I do add an action, you can see if I do, what am I looking for here? Azure Automation, and then create job, get job output, which is exactly what I'm doing here, is the create job, and then down below is getting the job output. And you'll see some of these that say premium. Even with the base license, you can use these. They just limit the number of transactions. You can do a bit more with these premium ones, but you still have access to them. The only other piece of this, so this is just the placeholder to call a job that you have set up inside of Azure Automation. So if you don't have much experience with Azure Automation, I mean, you can Google it. Microsoft has a ton of documents on it. It's basically just a PowerShell repository, and you can call any PowerShell script that you have listed in there. So I have an entire library in there, and I can reference any of them through these flows just by adding this action in here. All right, So what type of training is recommended for my staff? So I don't know if you want to take that one, Pam, or I can chime in too if you want.
Sure. I mean, I can tell you, thank you, Bill, for that question. I can talk a little bit about the types of training that we've done. And Michael, I'd love to hear you chime in as well. So Bill, really, we have 3 different types of training that we do. We have sort of a basic level training for Power Automate that I think would go along the lines with the flow that Michael originally showed us. So some of the ones that are there that are easy for sort of your average user to build out. And then we have training that's a little bit more advanced that would teach somebody to be able to build something similar to the second example that Michael showed us. So we can dig a little bit deeper into the tools and what's possible. And we also have this training that we're in the process of building out right now, which I sort of set up with the question that I gave to Michael about what kind of prerequisite skills might be helpful. And what we found is that some individuals can use a little bit of support, especially if they're not deeply technical, but they're individuals who really understand the business process. If you want to be able to arm them with the knowledge so they can participate in these conversations, either that they're having with someone who's building out the flows, or so they can start to participate in building them themselves, we're beginning to put together a class right now to help those individuals begin to train their brains the way Michael said, so they can start to think in the way that these tools think, so they can bring their skill and expertise to this types of development. So those are the 3 primary paths we have right now. And Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of second that. So in terms of speaking about the process automation, like an overall process, that's exactly what we do. So like that TA one that I was telling you about that had the like 8 conditional logic rules nested underneath each other, is they know the process better than I will ever understand the process. I'm not paid to know the process, I'm paid to automate it. So I always, again, get in a room with them and say, okay, here's your process. And we feed off of each other and drilling down, like I was talking about earlier, because we have to think very granularly. That's the only way to put it, because we have to account for everything when you're dealing with a process flow like this. So on stuff that's more simplistic, like that copying, I mean, that's just honestly just showing somebody and kind of walking them through the system, and most people can figure it out. For the more complex stuff, especially when it's operational or like a department style thing or a process thing, you definitely developing a relationship with the business and thinking granularly, like that is going to be the biggest piece of it. And then having someone maybe more technical that understands how to build it to actually do the technical heavy lifting. All right, so a couple more here. So does it support Google Apps? It does. So as I was just going to show you the same thing. So if you do add an action, you can come in here and look for anything. So if I start looking for Google, it has Google Sheets, Google Drive, Google Calendar, Google Tasks, Google Contacts. I haven't done many integrations with Google just because a lot of my clients don't use the G Suite, but I have developed a few, and it's the exact same as like with OneDrive and whatever. They all use similar API calls. And so, yeah, you have access into all the Google Suite in here as well. Is the training in person or web-based modules? That one's definitely for you, Pam.
Thanks. Yeah, so basically the answer is all of the above. So we certainly have some self-paced, self-serve web-based modules that individuals can go through on their own. That's great for sort of that baseline training. Then beyond that, especially for some of the more advanced training, and even that that class I told you that we have in development right now, which is to help level set skill sets individuals should have to be able to do this work or participate in this work. Those we actually can do live in person, post-COVID, or we can do them through a remote classroom scenario like this. So basically, we have the full gamut of tools and options at hand.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's all of the questions that we have. And we have 3 minutes left. So if anyone has a final question, get it in now. Otherwise, I think we are good to wrap it up.
Well, on behalf of Intellezy, I want to thank everyone for your attendance, your great questions. And Michael, I want to thank you so much for taking us through this. It was fantastic.
Yes, of course. I enjoy it. I am very passionate about flows. Like I said, I'm a scripter and a coder, so I thrive on this stuff. I love nothing more than to automate and digitize everything, because I never want to see paper again. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for everything, and hopefully you learned something from it and enjoyed yourself in the process.
Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, you too. Bye.